Okay, y'all, here we go for part 10 of Inception. Woo! And we about to get into a level of conversation that y'all ain't gonna hear about. The Lord reminded me of it while I was editing and moving some things around so I could get this recording onto this phone. Let's return to where we left off at. Cobb reveals that his form of inception was done on Maul. Let's get back to the spirit of sabotage. Now, as we recall, Cobb says, "Oh, we failed. We can't. We're going to have to stay here and then go into limbo, all of us together." Why? Why would he want to go into limbo and stay there? Because he subconsciously was giving in to the fact that he subconsciously wanted to stay there. I'm about to blow y'all minds in about 5 seconds, okay? I'm going to start with the relationship and then I'll work backwards, okay? Going back to Maul and Cobb's relationship, to y'all and y'all kingdom spouses. You are Anastasia. You're the one trying to pull your god ordained spouse out of a reality that doesn't exist. It don't exist. You're telling him this world is not real. You live in reality. You, in order to be freed from this world, have to kill her. Take her out. Forgive yourself. We as the God ordained spouses are saying, and I ain't saying man go kill. No, we saying that spiritually, that we've been going into the spirit and meeting them and saying, you need to free yourself of the guilt. What guilt? Cobb is the one that did the inception on them all. Your God ordained spouse. Some of y'all sitting up there thinking all this time your God ordained spouse was innocent in this situation. What if your God ordained spouse was a willing participant that actually had more to do with what happened to the counterfeit than you realized? What? What do you mean? Yeah. What if your God ordained spouse was operating in that player mentality and he was creating the thought processes just like these men do with this counterfeit? Go back and watch the Perfect Match review I did if you haven't, where they created the scenario. They told the lie. They were the one whispering sweet nothings that created the counterfeit's scenario that made them become attached to them in any way. What if they were the one that planted that thought? No, wait, what you mean? He can't do no wrong. He's a God ordained spouse. Is he? He's your God ordained spouse. I'm not doubting that, but he didn't drop out of heaven yesterday. Do you realize that, right? He was a human being that was involved with being out there in the world and was operating like the world was. Yeah, I'm sure that he had some godly tendencies in him because he may have been raised right. But some of them slipped away from some of their godly tendencies, okay? And not every phase of their godliness was pure as the driven snow, okay? Some of these men wasn't out here acting Christian, godly. They weren't out here being Mormons or out here being celibate. They was out here in the world. If you did not realize or did not know, some of them planted the thoughts. Some of them were the ones that were convincing these women that were the counterfeit that their thoughts, whispering the right sweet nothings into their ear to manipulate their thought process into believing they didn't have to have the life that they thought, or after having dealt with the childhood that they dealt with or the relationships that they dealt with, that they would be the savior to these women. And that they would never have to go back to that lifestyle because they were with them now, right? No, he couldn't have. But what if he did? Because that's what Leonardo DiCaprio's character Cobb did. He said, I created the inception. I did it, is what he said. He said, I created the thought that I planted in her mind that we would never have to leave that place. Because see, what happened is we got caught up in limbo and we were building out things, but she became so wrapped up in it. Some of the counterfeits came wrapped up in the love story that your God ordained spouse, let me repeat that, your God ordained spouse fed to them when they were playing their game. And that's what turned them into that obsessed, crazy person that wasn't allowing them to leave. Because that man did it to them. I remember, what's his name? The one that just got divorced. What's his name? What's his name? Pastor. I keep on calling. What is it? What is his name? He was married to Megan Good. You know who I'm talking about. Devon Franklin. He said that when he was in relationships prior, he had had a dream that all the women that he was playing in the relationships he was in prior to Megan when they were married, that he would play those women. And the Lord showed him these women's hearts bleeding all over the place. He was in a church and all these women, I don't remember whether they were wearing wedding dresses or what, each of them were bleeding because he left them bloody. What if your spouse did that? Because he gave them and sold them the idea that there was going to be something different with their relationship. And when they realized that it wasn't happening, they became enraged and crazy, and they were not going to let them go. What if the reason that counterfeit was acting all crazy was his fault? But he does not. Did he do no wrong? Did he? Did he? And he has to face up to the fact that he did. Now what? Now what? Because that's what he was saying. He found out that she was hiding a part of herself. that didn't want to leave that reality. They had the ability to go, but did not want to leave. And he couldn't allow her to leave because she had lost a part of herself, and he went to find it. He managed to track down one time that he left her for a period of time and started searching to find the thing that she hid. He went and did a extraction to find the thought and the thing she hid from him. I'm trying to find the best light here. The thing that she hid from him. And when he found it and found her safe, where she kept that thing secure, he changed it out. He incepted a new thought process. And what was the thought? That world was reality. And all that they had to do was to go back to reality, was to commit suicide in that world. And he took them to the train and had the train run them over. So that they could go back to their reality. But when they came back to the actual reality, he wasn't expecting that the thought he incepted into her mind was going to carry over into reality. And she was not going to be able to let it go. And he had to face in this moment that he was the cause of her reality feeling this way. That there was no thing as death. It just meant that they would go to another version or another level of limbo. Your God ordained spouse did you the counterfeit. Something that may have broken them. And they thought the only way to be fixed is to remain connected to that man. And the guilt for what that man did was the reason that it took him so long to get to you, because he's been dealing with guilt and unforgiveness for what he did to that woman. So he sabotages every single effort that he has to get away from that situation, because every time he had the opportunity, free and clear, to break it off, cut it off, deal with the situation, there was a level of guilt. And this is what Cobb explains. He had guilt for what he did by planting that thought in her mind. That when he planted that thought, he never expected to lead to her demise. Some of them feel like what happened to the counterfeit is their fault. And it led to some form of a death spiritually to that woman. And they don't feel worthy enough to be with you. Let that digest. I'm going to need you to let that digest for a moment. And that's why they don't feel worthy enough to be with you. Because they haven't forgiven themselves from the inner enemy that keeps trying to sabotage them. As a reminder, you don't deserve to be free from this. And I'm about to flip this on y'all. Are you ready? Some of y'all aren't, because y'all weren't ready for that. Some of you have been sabotaging yourself from exiting this season and crossing over into your breakthrough for the exact same reason. You don't feel worthy of going into the promised land. Because you haven't forgiven yourself. You've seen a lot, you've dealt with a lot, and some of you, the enemy has dealt with your mindset so much that you passively aggressively have been sitting there telling yourself that, oh, it'll happen when it's going to happen, and blah, 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 and God's going to do it, and if he going to do it, and I mean he going to do it, and blah, 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 blah. Y'all have been sabotaging yourself from crossing over into your blessing. Why? Because you haven't forgiven yourself from some of the things that you went through. One of the number one things, the majority I hear from every single minister of the number one thing that holds a child of God out of their blessing is either forgiveness of the people that did them wrong or forgiveness of themselves. Some of y'all have been self-sabotaging yourself to prevent you from being able to exit the wilderness because you don't really feel like you deserve to leave. You're afraid of walking into the happiness because you've been sabotaging yourself. If I stay here, I remember watching the movie, side note, I Am Legend. And in one of the scenes, the woman was telling Will Smith's character how there's a new world, and there was it was like, I don't want to use that word. I want to use new living environmental living space where they could grow their own food and all of this type of stuff. It was a new live living space with human beings and all of this type of stuff. And he was detrimentally afraid of leaving the isolation because he'd been there by himself for so long. It was only him and the dog. And when that woman told him that there was a chance, that there was a place, that there were more human beings, he could not think of what it would be like to be in that place where he had the ability to start over after the isolation. Some of y'all have been in this isolation with God for so long that you have actually used it as a crutch. Oh, I'm with God. Oh, I'm trying to deal with the sanctification of God. I'm walking with God. I'm close to God. And God's saying, I know you're close to me. We have an extremely wonderful relationship. I'm thankful. And because we have this relationship, I know I can bless you with this. But I need to push you out the nest right now. And you don't want to go. Because you technically have not forgiven yourself enough. And sometimes it's not even that. It's just the fact that you are so used to being with God that you don't even know how you're going to be able to deal with man again after this experience with the Lord. It's one of the scariest experiences that you've ever had. And you're walking in this isolation with the Lord, with very little contact with other people. And you've found a level of peace with Him that God is saying, okay, we've dealt with what needed to be dealt with you. Now it's time for you for the rubber to meet the road, and for you to take everything that you've learned and bless my people with it. Bless your spouse. Bless your family. Bless your children. Teach what you learned. And you've been sabotaging it under the guise of wisdom. Oh, I'm walking wisely. I'm being very cautious. I can't come out too quickly. You're in sabotage. They're self-sabotaging each other. That's what it is. So, I'm going to move past that. I know that hurts your little hearts there for a minute. I'm going to let you digest that. We're going to get back into the film. So, Cobb tells her, I'm the one. I incepted her. And when we went back, she couldn't handle it. And when she committed suicide, it ripped him apart. So he's been guilty all these years. Well, I don't know how long. You never really knew how long Maul had been dead. Nobody ever said if it was years, if it was a time frame. You don't know. I might have to do some research because that always bugged me. Because I'm like, how long was she dead? Was it a year? Was it a few years? Had time passed? But when you listen to the children on the phone, it sounds like they're still young. So it must not have been that long ago that she committed suicide. So I don't know. But meanwhile, after that piece of information was released, she was more willing. Well, she was irritated and she was crying and all of that. And while all of this is happening, Arthur is on level 2, taking them in their sleeping state, trying to figure out how he's going to put them in a position to cause a kick to occur with the van having started to roll. And because the van was rolling and now falling, he had to do everything in zero gravity. So the next 20 minutes on his level was spent operating in a zero gravity chamber, pretty much, fighting off the guards or the mercenaries in zero gravity, then going back to where they were, finding a rope of some sort. I think he pulled some type of twine or electrical cord, or I'm thinking of what you call it. It's like some type of cable, and wrapped it around each one of them, tying them together, then managing to carry them down to where the elevator shaft was, putting them onto the elevator, taking the charges that were initially supposed to blow in the room and putting them on the elevator shaft so that at the time that the kick needed to happen, he could hit the button for the electrical charges on the elevator to drop the elevator in tune with the kick in level 1 So that level 1, you'd have the kick in level 2, and then you had level 3, which is actually supposed to be an explosion. What happened in level 3? On level 3, you've got Eames and Sato shooting, and Sato, he almost dead now. You can tell he's almost dead, but he's still trying to stay alert. So he's shooting back into make sure that the mercenaries don't come up the shaft that they were in, and he's got a grenade. But Eames had to go somewhere. He had to do something. I think he was trying to wake up Fisher, because Fisher needed to wake up so that he could perform what they needed him to do. The whole reason they were there. So, meanwhile, Cobb is sitting with her, and he says, well, he doesn't say it. Anastasia hears the tune. She said, we're running out of time. You got to hurry up. He heard it too. He said, where is he? She said, you can't have him. He said, if I promise you that I'll stay here with you, will you let him go? She immediately told him he's on the porch. She went out there and untied him and checked to make sure he was alert. And he was fine. He was alert. And then she's like, the kick's coming. He said, I have to stay. She takes the gun and she kicks. She literally kicks Fisher off the porch. So that's going to be the kick that's going to throw him back to the level that they need him on. Now, meanwhile, he's staying there with her. She shoots Maul, or she shoots at Maul. But what happens? I don't know. Oh, the knife. I think when, if I'm not mistaken, when she went to lunge at him, he stabbed her. But I think she got shot too, because Anastasia shot at her, but she was already down at this point. And then she jumped off so that she could get back to level 3. But before she left, she's like, what's going to happen with you? He said, I've got to stay because by this point, Sato's dead. And because Sato's dead, I have to stay down here and look for him. And she said, okay, I'll leave you then. So she left to go back up to level 3. And he stays there with Maul, and they have a moment because he's holding her in his arms. And she said something about the children, and she said, but you promised me we were going to grow old together. And he said, you don't remember. We did. Because when they were in limbo, they were there for 50 years. So whatever age that they came down to limbo, which they looked somewhere around mid to late 30s, if they stayed down there in limbo from mid to late 30s for 50 years, they were in their 80s. They had spent a lifetime together. And he said, but now it's time for him to move on. And she slowly died in his arms, in tears, and she passed. And he held her one last time, and then let her go. Meanwhile, all is happening on level 1. The van is finally hitting the water. The kick occurs. Level 3, the assisted situation, Fisher wakes up and they have him go into the room that his father is in the hospital. He goes into the room and his father tells him, and he says, "You don't have to say anything." He said, "I was trying to tell you, not that you were a disappointment. You were a disappointment for trying to be me." And he puts the code in the safe because his father's pointing at the safe. He puts the code in the safe. When he opens it, it's the old windmill from the photo. When Eames sees that he's had his change of heart, he knows it's done. He hits the button so that the entire fortress blows up. So the entire fortress blows up, but there's still one problem. Cobb's still stuck in limbo trying to find Sato. So you see him wash up on the beach, same way he did in the beginning of the film. And now him and Sato are sitting in the same room that you saw them in the very beginning of the film. And he says, "I've been here for a long time. You finally found me." He said, "But I forgot why we were here." He said, "We had a agreement." And he's like, "Oh, yes, the agreement. And you wanted me to acknowledge the agreement that we made." And he says, "Yes." Meanwhile, everybody washes up on the beach. Fisher sees his uncle, which is actually the forger pretending to be his uncle, and they have a moment, and he said, "I'm going to divest the company." He's like, "Oh, and they're all smiling, and they're like, "Well, what happens with what's his name? Cobb. Cobb could be down there forever." It's like, it's gonna take him a while. It's like, he stay down there with Maul. It's like, no, he's down there trying to get Sato back up here. So meanwhile, Sato and Cobb are there, and they're talking about the agreement. Pretty much what is stated is that you see the gun on the table, and he's like, "We had to go back," but you don't see what happens. You see the piece spinning, but you don't see it turn over. Next scene you see them waking up on the flight. Fisher wakes up first, then you see Leonardo DiCaprio wake up, and then you see everybody else slowly coming to. Pause.